Welcome back to another JavaScript API tutorial. So I'm very excited to pick up this series again. It has been a long time since we've talked anything related to the JavaScript API, and it's been bothering me that we haven't talked about it. So I wanted to kind of pick up this series again. I know this is obviously the direction Microsoft is going. They've been making some big announcements related to this particular API recently. So for those of you who might not be aware, there is now going to be basically our macro recorder equivalent for the JavaScript API. Supposedly, it's only going to be available in the online version. To be honest, I haven't tried it, so I don't even know if it's there yet. But I'm assuming to a certain extent, it must be. I think at least if you're in preview mode, it is. But I guess I can go here and I can see if I wanted to. But yeah, so basically what it's going to be doing is it's going to be our macro recorder version of our basically of our VBA macro recorder. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know if they have it here yet. I guess not. It'll be here soon, hopefully. I guess you can do certain things where I guess if you wanted to, you could maybe put some things on it, but it's interesting stuff. You can obviously tell Microsoft is investing pretty heavily in this whole new API. So it's kind of interesting to see kind of maybe what direction they're going in and trying to get a better understanding of kind of like the features. But obviously, if they're going to introduce some type of like recording functionality that's similar to what we get in our desktop application, but now using the JavaScript API, that's probably that's a pretty big deal, because for the longest time, that was one of the biggest drawbacks to using the JavaScript API was there was no real, macro recorder equivalent. And so it became really hard to kind of get your feet wet with it, because you really did have to have a decent understanding of programming in order to kind of get comfortable with it. Where with the VBA macro recorder, it does a lot for you behind the scenes, and it's really a great way to kind of help accelerate that learning process sometimes. So it's nice they have it. But yeah, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to be talking about conditional formatting. So for those of you who maybe are just new to Excel, or maybe you're just doing a particular topic for your work that's related to the Office API, basically what a conditional formatting object is, if you want to call it an object. I mean, technically everything's an object in this model, but basically what it does is it allows you to highlight your cells based on certain criteria and rules that you set. So for example, maybe I want to highlight the maximum value in this range of cells. Well, that's basically using conditional formatting. Now, to use conditional formatting, normally what you do is you go to your home tab, you go to conditional format, and you'll see all these different types of conditional formats. Now, it's very important, because once we start coding, that you understand these are different types of conditional formatting. So there's the highlight cells rule. So that's kind of like our cell highlighting conditional format. We have a top bottom rule, which is our top bottom conditional format type. We have data bars, color scales, and icon sets. And then we also have custom ones that you can define. So these are ones where you can go in there, use a formula or whatever it is to go and define how you want to highlight your cells. Now, usually, for example, like if I do color scales, you can see it highlights them based on their values usually, and it will say, like, okay, these are the lower ones, higher ones. We can also use data bars that will basically like, okay, this is our maximum one, so we're going to make that data bar cover most of the cell. We have icons to say like, okay, this one's low, this one's high, this one's kind of just like neutral. It's not really in anywhere. They have all these little icons and stuff like that that usually are just used to help call attention to different cells that you want to, basically highlight. So maybe you want to say like, hey, this like particular store is crushing it with sales, right? Then you would use conditional formatting to do that, because it's an easy visual way for the user to kind of just focus in on that. It's like, okay, obviously they highlighted it. There must be a reason they highlighted it. So that's what we're going to be covering today using the JavaScript APIs. We're going to see how we can create our own conditional formats and apply them to a range of cells inside of our Excel workbook. So that's the plan. And with that being said, let's get started. All right. So when we want to work with a range of cells, we've got to first specify the location of that range of cells. Now, there are explicit ways of defining that range of cells, and there's not so explicit ways of defining those range of cells. My advice to you, you should always try to be as explicit as possible, because oftentimes when you are working on different workbooks and stuff like that, you can never assume that things are always in the same position. So one of the first things that we should always do is we should define the worksheet that we're going to be working out of. So define the sheet. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using constant, and we'll give it Excel sheet. I use the constant keyword when I'm expecting a variable to kind of stay static. So I'm not really expecting to change my sheet. I am saying, you know what, I'm going to be using the same sheet over and over again. So there's no reason to make it kind of more dynamic. We use my context object, and then there is a workbook property, and then there is a worksheets collection that exists with every workbook. And if we use the get item method, you can specify the worksheet that you want using the worksheet name as the key. Now I have a worksheet called data, so I want that worksheet. Once I've defined my particular worksheet, let's grab a range of cells. Now, just for some readability here, I'm going to kind of make it a little bit broken out so I can just easily track back when need. And so I'm going to say conditional format. And then for this one, we're going to do color scale. Color scale. All right, so define the range of cells. So again, I'm not expecting this one to change. So I'm going to do sales range. I'm going to do Excel sheet. There is a method called get range, and it takes the cell address. I want cell C2 to C7. And then to just kind of emphasize, this is just that range right there. So I'm saying, okay, I want to apply some type of conditional formatting to that range of cells. Now, at this point, it's very important to kind of, again, highlight something I said earlier in the video. When you are defining a conditional format, you have to define what type of conditional format you want to create. There are different types. Highlight cell values, top, bottom, data bars, color scales, icon sets, and then your own custom one. In this case, I want a color scale one. So add a color scale conditional format object to the range. So we'll create a new variable. We'll call it sales conditional format. It will equal our sales range. There is a conditional formats collection because a range can actually have multiple conditional formats. Normally, you don't do that, but sometimes you do. And then we're going to call the add method. So we're saying, okay, this collection, I want to add a new conditional format to it. Now there might already be some there. There might not be. In this case, there's none. So what we're going to do is we're going to say Excel, and this is our Excel namespace. We're going to go to our conditional format. And then if you go down a little bit more, you'll see type, conditional format type. And then you'll see the different types. So you can see there is icon set, data bar, custom, contains text, cell value, color scale, preset criteria, and so on and so on. Now, you might see more here than what you're seeing from that dropdown. That's because contain text is actually kind of its own special one, but it's actually under the cell value one. Now, in my case, I want color scale, so I'm going to define a new color scale one. And then now that I have my particular conditional format object, we now go to the next portion, which is depending on the particular conditional format object you have, you need to define sometimes criteria about that particular conditional format. Now, in our case, because we're working with a color scale conditional format, that one is defined by either 2 criteria or 3 criteria. To kind of just make it visual, I'll go here, I'll go to more rules, and you'll notice that I have a 2 color scale or a 3 color scale. Now, if I have a 2 color scale, I have 2 criteria I have to define. I have a minimum and a maximum. If I go to 3 color scale, I now have 3 criteria that I have to define. Minimum, midpoint, and maximum. Each criteria is defined by its type. Now it can be the lowest value, it could just be a straight up number, it could be a percent, it could be a formula, or a percentile. Once I define the type of criteria, then I have to specify the value for that particular type. Sometimes you don't need anything. So, just keep that in mind. In some cases, you don't need anything. And then also what we have to define is our particular color. So this one is going to be the color that we want that cell to be highlighted. So that's how we need to think about our criteria. So what we do is we now go over here, define our criteria for our color scale. So create a new variable. We'll call it sales criteria. We'll just equal a dictionary, or I guess a JSON object. I don't know, what do they call them? Hash tables and all that kind of fun stuff. So with our sales criteria, there's 3 criteria that we're going to define. The first one is called minimum. This one has 3 arguments that we have to define. One is formula. In this case, it's null. We're not going to be using a formula in order to define it. The next one is the type. And so in this case, we can do Excel.conditional format color criterion type. And then I want this one to determine our lowest value. So this will only highlight the lowest value. And then finally, I need to put my little commas. I forgot about that. Put my comma there. Perfect. Now I need to define the color that I want my particular cell to be highlighted. In this case, I like blue, so it's going to be blue. All right, so we defined our first criteria. Next, I'll just copy this just for kind of save some time, and I'll just change a couple things about it. All right, perfect. So this one will be called midpoint, and then this one, maximum. Okay, so for our midpoint, we're going to be using a formula, and in this case, it's going to be 100. And what we're going to be saying is that once you are 100% of the value, you'll be blue. Now, normally with this one, 100 probably isn't the best. I'll just do something like 50. And then with this one, I will just say, make it orange. So basically, like once you've made it through 50% of the values, then you want to get closer and closer to orange. Once you reach 50%, you're orange. And then for our maximum value, we need to define that one. And so in this case, we're going to be doing the highest value. And this one, I want yellow. So once we've done that, we've defined our criteria. Now we need to add our criteria to our conditional format object. And so what we do is add our criteria to our color scale. And so we'll say sales conditional format. We'll go into the color scale property, and then we'll go into the criteria property, and we'll simply just assign all of our criteria to it. So now we should be able to run it, and it should highlight our cells. And it did. Wonderful. Now I am going to try something because I never actually tried it when I was writing the code. But I'm just kind of curious, obviously if I don't define my formula, is that going to kill it? Because technically speaking, if there's no formula, maybe I can skip it. Looks like it works fine. So you probably don't have to put in the formula in there. So some of the examples I found online, they had formula. It looks like if you're not defining your formula, you don't even have to specify it. So it's kind of nice. All right. So I'm just going to clear out my rules again, just so that way I'm starting from a fresh slate. And now we'll move on to the second type of conditional format that we're going to be covering. So I'm going to copy all that. And the next one is going to be conditional format, custom. With this one, we're not going to be using the sales range anymore. We're going to be using the cost range. And the cost range is defined from cell D2 to D7. Once I've defined my range of cells, I still have to define my conditional format. So we'll just say cost conditional format and then cost range. And then I'll say add a custom conditional format object to the range. And all you got to change is this to custom. And once you've done that, you're good to go. For a custom one, we have to define a couple of different things about it. So one is the role, and we're going to be using a formula to define this role. So first, define the role. So basically, how do I go about and know which cells I should highlight? So I'm going to say cost conditional format. I'm going to go into that custom property, and then I have role. Now, you do see here there are multiple ways to use a formula in order to define your role. One is using just the regular formula, which is for most, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, for most individuals who have the English version of Excel, that's just the one you're going to be using, or formula R1C1. So that means if you're specifying cell ranges in your formula, you can use R1C1 notation. And then also there is a formula local, which basically says if you use a different language to run Excel other than English, then you can write your formula using your specific local language. So in this case, I just need formula, and it's a string that is just another formula. And so in this case, I'm going to say if D2 is greater than the average of, I'm going to lock D2 to D7. Okay. And if that is true, then you can highlight it. So all I'm saying is, as I loop through each one of these cells, if that cell is above the average of this entire range of cells, then highlight it. Now, technically speaking, there's kind of already something like that. There's an above average and below average. So technically, I'm just kind of reinventing the wheel. There's really no need to do that, but this is, again, usually a simple example that most people can comprehend. I've seen some really crazy formulas for conditional formatting, and it's intense. So once you've defined your role, so now you've defined, okay, which cells to highlight, how do you want to format those particular cells, right? So how do you want to format them? Well, define the format, change font to white. So we're going to say cost conditional format. We're going to go in that custom property. We're going to go into that format property. There is a font property, which returns basically a font object. And then there is a color property that we can define about it. In this case, I want it to be white. And then change the fill to red. So we'll say cost conditional format, custom format, fill, color. In this case, I want it to be red. It's very long, right? A lot of typing. Okay, and then change the font to italic, cost conditional format, custom format, font, and then italic. And then this one is just a Boolean, so it can just be true or false. And then finally, change the font to bold. And so this is cost conditional format, custom format, font, bold equals true. Bam. And with this one, with custom ones, it's actually kind of nice. You don't need to do any additional things. You actually can just run it as is, and you should be okay. And you can see that it did exactly what we wanted it to do. It highlighted the cells that were above the average of the range, and it made sure to change the fill to red, the font to white. It bolded them, and then it also made sure they were italic. So this is using a custom conditional format. All right, so now we're gonna go on to our last one, which is gonna be using text, because I know text is usually a really popular conditional format. And so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna highlight this one, and I'm just gonna copy it again. Bum, bum, bum. And here we're gonna say text, not test, text. We're gonna define a new range. In this case, I want it to be item. And the item is from B2 to B7. I'm going to define a new conditional format object. And this one is going to be for the item range. So we'll call it item. And in this case, our conditional format type is going to be contains text. So here, add a contains text. Contains text conditional format object to the range. With this one, excuse me, we're going to define some of our rules about our particular item conditional format. And so what we're going to do is I'm just going to delete all of this. And we're going to say item conditional format. With this one, you'll notice there's some text comparison ones. Now, and also, if you kind of think about it, it's logically, I would say, organized to a certain extent. So you've got your type, and then you go into that particular property that is associated with that particular conditional format type. So cell value, color scale, custom, databar, icon set. So you take your format object, then you go into your, basically your, I don't know, what would you call this? Returns to specific text conditional format properties. So I guess like this is just the whole like umbrella of formatting. So you can think of formatting as being multiple different things. This one is just simply saying, okay, once I know this, I want you to, you know, format it X, Y, Z, right? So that's, I guess, like maybe the way to think of it is just like it's defining the rules, it defines the formatting and all that kind of fun stuff. Maybe that's like the right way to think about it. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll define, what is it? The rule. And this one, again, is just going to be basically like our little dictionary object. And so we'll say, okay, first, this is the way I like to it, look for the text new item. Okay, so look for the text new item. So we'll define our text property and we'll say new item. Okay. Look for cells that contain new item. Okay, so here, this is the text you're looking for. Well, it's not even really what you're looking for. You're just saying, here's some text that I'm going to be using as my rule. Here, what you're saying is you're defining your operator, which is saying, okay, Excel, conditional, where is it? It's down below a little bit. Text operator. And you can see there's contains, begins with, ends with, invalid, not contains. So I don't want to go as far as to say like, well, you know, you're looking for this one that contains it. Well, no, you could just say you're looking for this text. And then your operator that you're using to say, well, if this text is in the beginning, then that's good. That means highlight it. So that's basically like kind of how you should think about it. Okay, so now what we're going to be doing is now that we've defined our rules, we need to define our formatting. So second, define the format. And so what we'll do is we'll go into our items conditional format. We'll go to our text comparison that contains our formatting and rules and all that stuff. And then we'll go into our format property and we can find the format of our font. We'll make this one equal to white. And then what I'll do next is I'll go into my second one, text comparison format. We'll go into fill and then we'll do color. And then this one will equal green. Perfect. So this one should highlight these guys down here, green. Perfect. So it looks like it's working just fine. I do want to highlight something. So if you keep looking at this, you will see it just keeps reapplying it. So you got to be careful if you run this like over and over and over again. Conditional formats is actually a really good way to slow down your workbook really fast. So use them sparingly. Don't necessarily just have a bunch of cells that all have to be formatted because those are usually like dynamically updated. And normally they will dramatically slow down your workbook. Just like VLOOKUPs, unfortunately too. VLOOKUPs are horribly known to slow down workbooks sometimes if you start looking up the entire column. All right, let's do the next one. I guess there was one more. I thought this one was the last one, but it's not. This is the last one. So this one is going to be Databar. And so with this one, what we're going to do is we're going to basically just take some of this up here, and then I'll just copy this and then put it all nice down in blue. And so we'll say profit range, profit bit conditional format. My profit range is in E2 to E7. And then I want my profit range. I'm going to go into my conditional formats. I'm going to add one. My conditional format type, in this case, is a Databar. So that's the type that I'm defining. Now we need to basically, this one's a little bit different. There's not really a rule. You're kind of just defining certain features about your particular Databar, right? So one of those features is you can specify the direction of the Databar. So specify the direction of the Databar. Okay, so we'll say profit conditional format. I'll do my Databar property, and you can see there's all this wonderful stuff we can change about it. And so here is bar direction. Now with this one, we can do equals, and then it is Excel conditional Databar direction, and then it's left to right. So we'll just do left to right, and that should be fine. You can also technically, if I remember correctly, well, we'll just wait till the end before I start trying to say if it works or not. So this one, we're specifying the direction of the Databar. Now we're going to specify the fill color. So I want to change the fill color. So change the fill color of the Databar. And so we'll say profit conditional format, Databar. And then this is a little bit not intuitive, but bear with me. We're going to say, okay, for positive format. So basically, if you have a positive value, do a fill color. There's also a gradient color. I've never actually used it, so I don't know how that all works. What is it? Boolean represent. Oh, so this one I think just specifies if it's going to be gradient or not. Oh, well, maybe we might put that on. For this one, let's do blue. Okay, so this changes the fill of our Databar. And then they also have this like axis format. So basically you're saying, where do you want the Databar to start? In the middle of the cell, at the bottom of the cell, you know, so on and so on. So specify the axis format. So we'll do profit condition format Databar. Oh wait, no. Axis format. This will equal my Excel dot conditional. Oh God, no. Conditional Databar axis format. You can do automatic, cell midpoint, or none. I want cell midpoint because then it starts like basically halfway through. Just an FYI, this one can be a little bit fickle sometimes. I'm hoping it runs the first time. You see kind of what happened here? For whatever reason, it doesn't do it unless I specify it the second time. I have no idea as to why that is. I have played around with it. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's because I've specified this one. I mean, I guess like what I could technically do is like maybe like if I just put this one up here. I mean, that could be doing it. I'm not entirely sure. Let me. Yeah, no, it's still doing the same thing. But yeah, so for whatever reason, the first time it won't sync it, but then the second time it will. I still don't know if it's some way I wrote the code. It's very, very possible that is the case. I think it's a little interesting. I'm more curious than anything. I'm kind of, let me see if Databar show left to right, gradient fill. Oh, well, it's interesting too. Well, no, because I think gradient fill is by default. And then negative value and axis. I guess like, is there anything really different like compared to this one? No. Let me do this. I'm just really curious. Okay. It'd be interesting if in this, see, and that's even weirder, right? Like, so now it's clearly telling me like it's correct. It's just not showing it. It's just not updating it. What is it? Shift F9. Ah, interesting. Okay, that's weird. I don't know. Maybe some other people will get that. If you don't, I mean, that's obviously good for you, but for the rest of us, not so much. I do want to just add one other thing. So like change the gradient. I like gradient, but I don't know. For me, it's like positive format and then gradient fill equals false. Okay, let me remove everything. I wonder if, I wonder, what is it? Context, application, calculate. This might fix it. This might fix it. I'm not positive it will, but it might. Clear rules from selected sheets. Not even that one. Ooh, okay, here we go. Excel.calculation type, and then just do full. Okay, maybe this one will work. I'm just really curious. I just want to know why it's not doing what it's doing, but that's fine. It obviously has something to do with the fact of maybe this one has to actually update the cells. Okay, so maybe that's what you have to do. Maybe just do like a full calc update when you're adding the data bars. Okay, do update, and maybe that will fix it. I think mine's turned on to automatic though, so I don't know why. I mean, I could see if it's not. I can't remember if it was. No, it's on automatic. But yeah, okay. So yeah, with that being said though, that finishes the video. So at this point, if you have any questions about using conditional formats or just, you're trying to get through like a tough problem, feel free to put them down in the comments below and I will do my best to kind of help you through the process. But other than that, in our next video, I think related to our JavaScript API, we have a big topic coming up, and we're going to see how to build a full Excel add-in. So that's really the fun part. So this is putting everything together. I think at this point we have enough, I would say, of a foundation to start getting into the really complicated stuff of building an add-in. For those of you who have never built a JavaScript add-in using this API, be ready. It's very different from the normal add-ins that you have to make using VBA. You are going to be learning tons of new languages in the process: CSS, HTML, TypeScript, jQuery, React. I think we can use React. Can we use React? I don't remember if we can or not. But yeah, it's a lot. So just be ready. Definitely take it one step at a time when you're starting to build these add-ins. Start as simple as possible if you've never done it, because when you're trying to build this and at the same time learning 2 or 3 different languages at the same time, it can be overwhelming. So don't overcomplicate any project that you try to do your first time. What we're going to be doing is just building a full end-to-end add-in. And what it's going to be doing is parsing some filing stuff that I have, and then dumping some of that data inside of our Excel workbook. So really cool stuff. Hopefully that will give everybody kind of like a good foundation. And then finally, we will have hopefully what we consider a full walkthrough on YouTube on how to build these wonderful things, and none of us will be lost anymore. At least that's the goal. But yeah, that's basically what's coming up. Other than that, thank you again for watching, everybody. We'll see you in our next video.